today's final Bench2Market talk for this academic year, and it is on securing investment for your startup. We have a great group of panelists to discuss what it looks like to get involved with folks in VC lands. So I will give a little bit more information about that later on, but before we get started, I just have a few housekeeping details. Since this is our last of our series this year, we do have a quick 5-minute end of series survey that we'll be sending out after the discussion is over. This will, like I said, it should take about 5 minutes, but this is very helpful in receiving feedback from you all as we prepare for next year's series. So please take the time to fill it out once you receive it. I wanted to share a few of our commercialization resources. Although the Bench2Market Talk series will be on hiatus for the summer, there's still ways to engage with our team and others if you have any questions around commercialization. So one of our resources is we offer complimentary legal office hours in partnership with Emory School of Law and Professor Nicole Morris. There are different topics and areas of interest that you can discuss with her. And if you're interested, we offer this by appointment only. So you'll have to make an appointment through our website. So if you check out biolocity.godtech.edu/legal office hours, you can check there to learn more. One thing that I want to share is soon we'll have a new set of office hours. So we are a part of the Barda Drive network, and they offer grants and resources up to $750,000 for ideas in health securities. And so soon we'll be able to offer office hours with folks from Barda, so you can learn more about those resources. In the meantime, here are some areas of interest and opportunities for Barda. And if you're interested in learning more about any of these, feel free to contact our team with any questions, and we can set up a meeting to discuss. And so without further ado, I would like to introduce our panelists and get started with the discussion. If you have any questions during the talk, please feel free to just shoot them in the chat, and we will be able to ask them real time, or we'll also leave a little time at the end for questions. So without further ado, I'll give a brief intro of each of the panelists, and then we can get started. So first, we have Dr. Justin Burns. He is an investment professional with Morningside Technology Advisory. And he evaluates new opportunities and supports company creation and financing for companies in the life sciences, ag tech, and digital health fields. Additionally, Justin provides operational support and managerial oversight to portfolio companies and serves as director on the boards of several biotech companies. He also has a connection to both the Emory and Georgia Tech, or Emory and Georgia community, where he formerly worked at Emory OTT, and he's received both his BS and PhD from Georgia Tech. Next, we have Dr. Michelle Ho, who is a senior associate at 5AM Ventures. She joined in 2018, and she serves as an observer on boards of several therapeutics companies. Through 5AM's 459 initiative, she helped to build and launch Insoma, and she serves as the acting head of corporate strategy there. She earned her PhD in bioengineering from Rice University, developing next generation AAV-based gene therapy vectors. And finally, we have Dr. Preetha Ram. She is a VC, an entrepreneur, technologist, and educator with wins in all of those verticals. She's currently a managing partner at Pier 70 Ventures and invests in innovation with impact and health tech. The INpact Fund, led by Preetha and fellow managing partner, Sean Hawkins, invests in early stage companies led by diverse teams in the areas of precision medicine, digital health, health services, and medical devices. She also has a connection with Emory and Georgia Tech. So she has a PhD in biophysical chemistry from Yale and an MBA from Emory. And so with that, I will stop sharing my screen and actually turn it over to the panelists. So it's great to hear all your backgrounds. I'm very excited about today's discussion, but I wanted to give you an opportunity, even though I gave a little snippet of how or what your research and investment interests are, but I'd love to hear directly from you guys about your different firms. And so maybe we could start with Justin.
Sure. Thanks, Courtney. And thanks for the invite. Really looking forward to the discussion. So I'm part of the life science investment team at Morningside. Morningside is a global life science investor, although we do have teams in the more traditional technology and fintech space, as well as real estate. We're not a fund in the traditional sense in that we don't have limited partners. And so all of the wealth we invest comes from the Chan family, originally from Hong Kong. Gerald Chen, our founder, is also a scientist by training. And so about 35, 40 years ago, sought to redeploy the wealth of the family into life science and really anything to better the human condition. That being said, sort of no indication or modality is off the table. We do sort of let the science drive us with the idea that we're not looking to invest in something iterative, appreciating maybe that there's therapeutics or others that could, extend life by 3 or 4 months, but we're looking for something a little more transformative. We typically invest in early Series Seed, A and B rounds, although we can go earlier or later, all the way through sponsoring, clinical trials or sponsoring research at a university, participate in company formation, or could also participate in IPOs and crossover rounds. Big flexibility, but I'd say our sweet spot's probably in the $10 to $30 million round size.
Awesome. And then I guess, Preetha, could you share a little bit more about you?
Sure, thanks. So I'm a managing partner at Pier Ventures, and our first fund is called the INpact Fund, where we bring together innovation and impact. So the fund is an early stage fund. We invest in health very broadly, health tech. So that includes verticals like precision medicine, which would be of interest to this audience here, but also digital health, health services, medtech, and devices. And within these 3-4 verticals, we are typically very early stage. So we might well be right after your angel round or your friends and family round at Series A. But then again, we're also pretty opportunistic. So we might also participate in later rounds. We have a diversity lens. So we definitely look for high performing teams that are diverse. That's important to us. And we also look to see if the innovation is addressing problems in the, that is of importance to underrepresented communities. So with all of this, we have a pretty tight focus on our investment thesis, which might also include therapeutics, but it depends largely upon the team and the point of the innovation, actually.
Oh, awesome. Well, thank you. And then Michelle?
Thanks, Courtney. Again, thanks again for inviting me. Really great to see you all. Looking forward to the discussion. I'm with 5am Ventures. We're an early stage venture capital firm. I'm based in San Francisco, but we also have offices in Boston. Teams kind of split across both coasts. The firm itself has been around for 20 years, and in that time has raised just over $2 billion total under management. We recently closed Ventures Fund 7, which is a $450 million vehicle. With that, our focus is mostly in the therapeutic space. So similar to Justin, Preetha, we're agnostic when it comes to indication and modality, looking to have a broad portfolio within therapeutics. And given our name, we do like to get involved early. So for us, that's typically the first institutional round of capital that's raised. Think of it as kind of three buckets that we'll invest in. We can do seeds, we do Series A's with our ventures fund, and Courtney alluded to this. We have a 4:59 initiative, so just 1 minute before 5 a.m. That's when we'll get involved even earlier. So we'll actually build alongside the founders, help with the company creation, lay out business strategy, and essentially serve as kind of interim operating team for the first 12 to 18 months during the seed period before firing ourselves as soon as possible to bring in the full-time management team as you go out to raise the Series A. We lead or co-lead investments. So we're typically the largest check writer in the early rounds, and we syndicate all of our deals. So we like to work with other investors to help support the companies throughout. I'll briefly mention, aside from the Ventures Fund, we also raised an Opportunities Fund, so an additional $300 million fund that we can use to invest either in our later stage companies within our portfolio, but also to make new investments. And so kind of broadening the mandate, now we're going from kind of soup to nuts company creation all the way through kind of Series Bs, crossovers, public investments as well.
Awesome. It's very cool to hear, one, how each of your companies or your firms invest more broadly, but also kind of the background of what you guys invest in, because each group is a little bit unique, which is great. I'm excited to hear all of your different perspectives. And we actually have our first question, which I think will help set the stage for the discussion as well. So one of the questions in the chat right now is, how many investments do you make in a typical year, and what total dollar amount on average? Because I think we answer that question, then we'll talk about how to actually get to you guys. So does anyone want to take that one first?
At least for us, sorry, go ahead, Michelle.
Go ahead, Justin.
I think for us, it's pretty varied. I think we're not constrained by any sort of number of deals, and the dollar size, I think, varies accordingly. We do, some series seed or pre-seed safes, all the way through. We did a deal last year where we were part of a Series D crossover round and our check was 50 million. So it's a bit loaded, but I'd say we do as many as we can, and always, again, try to be opportunistic and follow the science.
Yeah, and I guess for 5 a.m., we're aiming to invest in around 15 to 18 companies per fund. And so I guess back calculating, that's about 5 or 6 investments a year. In terms of check size, if it's a seed, single digit millions, we'll fund to milestones as they make sense. And then for Series A, looking to deploy majority of the capital there. Ultimately, with each company, we're aiming to invest up to $25, $40 million per company, and that's across the lifetime of a company.
So we are early stage, and we probably will come in at about 4 to 5 investments per year. And then because our typical check size for early stage is anywhere from $250K to about 2-3 million, it depends upon that. So it will certainly run the gamut of size and investment. And again, like Michelle said, we could lead, we could, syndicate deals. And so that's the range.
Yeah, perfect. No, well, that's great to know. And each of you have spoken about the times in which you start to fund. So maybe as early as a seed to this Series A. And so one question that I have, I guess a general topic that I hear a lot is, how do we even reach out to investors, and when should we reach out to investors? So maybe you can even start then. So when is the right time to contact you? Is it when they're ready to raise their fund? Do you talk to people early? What would you suggest?
I think we'd probably all, I don't know, but it sounds from Michelle that we're aligned. I think you start to reach out to investors when you have some traction, some proof of point. It's more than a lab project, as it were. And also when, to some extent, you've possibly gone past the friends and family and the angel investment kind of a thing. So we definitely look for some proof of traction, some partnerships. Having said that, we are willing to have conversations earlier on, even before that. And you and I have talked, Courtney, about how it's like Michelle, where we're willing to be a partner on the side, validate and move things along, and even make connections, as it were, before the funding happens. So the best time to start, actually, and there's one more thing that I want to mention, and the best time really is when you're ready mentally, and it's really important, and you've gotten over that hurdle, that any uneasiness you may have about the venture industry and about corporate America and commercialization, all as being good things, and that you're a business or you want to be a business. That mental crossover has to happen, and then things will go much better after that. So over to the two of you.
Yeah, I think we're always fine to have, like you said, a discussion, especially if you have an idea or if it's a cool technology. But yeah, I agree with you. At the same time, I think there's got to be a need to approach the VC. I think if you're asking for money, you should know what you're going to spend it on, or at least have a plan. Yeah, again, we're always happy to see new technology. We spend a fair amount of time even just engaging with investigators or researchers, at universities or early stage companies. But to sort of, if you're going to start your fundraising or roadshow in earnest, I agree with Preetha. I think you should be ready for, what comes out of that. But having a well-defined ask and not asking the VC to put that together, because I think that just sort of gives you some credibility.
Yeah, not too dissimilar from the other panelists, I would say. Especially with academic founders, we're happy to have conversations early. Pre-pandemic, we would, go and visit professors and kind of meet with tech transfer offices, et cetera. These days, more in virtual settings, just to have the conversation going. Part of the answer, I think, also depends on the firm that you're reaching out to. And so if you want to have early stage, early discussions, still kind of nascent in the thinking on the business side, reach out to the builders. Don't go for like the later stage investors at that point they'll think of evaluating opportunities, different stages. For us, I think as Preetha mentioned, having proof of concept, typically in vitro, ideally in vivo systems that are recapitulating the disease biology that you're trying to address. That's sort of the technology stage that we like to engage in. I think if there isn't proof of concept, we're happy to discuss, but probably low likelihood of us actually moving forward and writing a check and funding. And I think, as the others said, it's good to have an idea of what therapeutic applications, especially if it's a platform technology that you're thinking about. We may push back, and that's part of kind of the seed process for us, is helping work with the founders to come up with a seed plan, to help prioritize indications or think through kind of like what additional studies would be needed to get other investors excited as you raise the next fund.
Oh, that's a great advice. And I appreciate that you all mentioned speaking with folks at the university level, which is what we mainly work with. So a follow-on question to that. So oftentimes we get questions of like even how to reach out, like what information should we include? What will get that first conversation, whether it's virtually or in person? So one, how do people find you? Should they just find you on LinkedIn? Do they just reach out to your info at? What's the best way to I guess start the conversation? And what kind of information are you looking for in that initial contact?
I can go last this time.
I'm happy to start. I would say, as most things in the industry, warm introductions are always the best. And so if you know folks or you have colleagues who've worked with us in the past or interacted with us, try to get a warm introduction. It's always helpful. Even on our end, that's how we'll reach out to folks too. And we're reaching out to companies we're interested in learning about. It always helps to go through either an investor that's in the company or someone we know there. So that's the top one. But if you don't have any way of getting to us through a network connection, cold emails, I'll respond to those. And with that, just make sure it's succinct. You're reaching out directly to the investment team member that you think is relevant. I would not spam like the entire investment team. People hate it when you do that. So all of the bios of the team members are online. That's pretty much for almost every venture firm. So look up, do a little bit of research, see who might be interested. And from there, just maybe like short one-liner on kind of, what the ask is, who you are. And then it's helpful to include, either a one-page summary, kind of an exec summary, or if you have one, a non-con deck that doesn't have, confidential information, but has one kind of an overview of the company, the team, some initial data. At least for us, if there's no data in it, we're probably not going to engage. I think folks sometimes have a question of how much do we put in here? Put a little bit so that we understand that some of the technology is de-risked and gets us intrigued. And, always in follow-up discussions, we can go in and sign a CDA if there's unpublished data that, further proves out you have other animal models, et cetera. But at least having something in there. Otherwise, it's hard for us to sink our teeth in if there's nothing to analyze.
Yeah, I agree. I think warm intro is definitely easiest. Being at an office that doesn't publicize some of the team members on our website. We have portfolio companies, but the team members are not there. It's a little bit by design, but we do have a catch-all email. That being said, cold emails to our info@morningside.com. Rarely do we take calls that come in through that. We do take some, but again, driven by the science. So to Michelle's point, always including at least sort of what it is. I will say I probably have 50 or 60 LinkedIn requests just sitting from people I don't know. They just found me. Some come with a little bit of information. So it's hard to say, how well those work. We do see them, but I think it's also just time. We're happy to connect, but I for one, my LinkedIn network is not my primary deal source. Let's put it that way.
I think everyone's spoken about warm introductions. That is absolutely critical. But I do think, I think you should be using your LinkedIn wisely and looking for the seconds. If you know who the principals are, and at least by name, that should be on most venture firms' websites, if not. So I do get a lot of inbound on my LinkedIn, which it depends on, so I prioritize the ones from people that claim to know someone that I know. And when you're doing that, as everybody has said, a succinct one paragraph about what it is that you are, what do you do, and why should I care about you is important. And in framing that one paragraph or your one pager, do spend some time looking on the website of the company that you're targeting and try to understand what it is that, what is their investment focus. So if you're, for example, later stage, looking for a SPAC and you're outside the US, it wouldn't make sense for us. So why waste anybody's time? But then you guys, that doesn't apply here. My point is, make sure that at least you roughly fall within the investment focus areas. I get cybersecurity startups reaching out to me. And anyway, so that's my 2 cents on the matter. Now that we've opened up again after COVID, I do tend to go, as I'm sure all of us do, to several face-to-face things as well. And of course, there's Zoom things. So don't hesitate to reach out after these kinds of things that you'll attend. And really, really think about mining your network. That's where those warm introductions are going to come from.
Maybe to Preetha's point, I think when you're at those in-person sort of partnering events, those, we tend to take, I think, more cold intros just because that's what we're there to do, right? And we're doing it in person. But aside from those, it's, I think, a higher bar to take one that's cold. I think it would have to be really interesting. And like Michelle, we will respond, but I don't think you should, maybe to the earlier point, don't get your feelings hurt if it doesn't turn into a natural connection right away.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, that is great advice and very timely, especially since, as we were talking before the panel started, we're starting to go to more in-person events now. So it's the shift of doing everything virtually. And now there is the opportunity to meet people in person. So say that I am an innovator and I've gotten a warm intro to you. We've done our initial contact. We've had a discussion. You guys are interested. Let's talk about what happens next. So when you're talking, as you mentioned, Michelle, if I send you some nice, compelling data, and we started to wrap stuff up, what kind of stuff are you looking for in this due diligence period? So like what types of information is analyzed during that, and how can I prepare myself?
Yeah, I guess I'm happy to start. I'd say especially for like kind of academic spinouts, most of it's going to be data driven. And so we want to see kind of pretty much all the relevant data as it pertains to either the platform that you're developing. Is it working in different systems? Have you tested in various human cell lines that are relevant, disease models, either organized systems, Aviva models, or what studies you have coming up as you're thinking about it, and like prioritization around that. It's helpful for us to understand not just sort of the technology validation, but also importantly, what to do with that from a therapeutic standpoint. Oftentimes, especially with academic founders, it's maybe you've kind of funded certain disease models based on grant funding, which is very, very common, but, not very often do folks kind of take a step back and say, okay, what does the actual market need? What is the standard of care? How does this align, compare against both existing therapeutics, but also emerging therapies that are in early clinical development from other biotech companies. So for us, getting understanding of competitive differentiation, and ultimately not just how is it differentiated, but why would that actually change the trajectory and outcome for patients ultimately. So we're looking for things that are going to be better and better in terms of, is this going to be meaningful and impactful for patients that physicians will actually prescribe this. Some of those things I'd say maybe depending on the modality. So if it's a cell or gene therapy, for instance, complex modality, we'll probably do a bit more diligence on the manufacturability. And so how do you think about scaling up the protocol? If it's, let's say, an ex vivo differentiation process, can folks outside the lab recapitulate this? So we may fund, small experiment at a third-party CRO to see if that's actually tech transferable, things like that. So it's bespoke depending on the opportunity itself. But I guess the key things are, what applications can we get excited about? Aside from just, is the technology and science cool? Is the data compelling to us? And then, how scalable is it, and is it kind of ready? Are dollars the only thing that's preventing this from being scaled back? Or is there more science that needs to be kind of fleshed out, is the main question we're looking for.
And maybe to Michelle's point, especially for therapeutics, I think we look strongly for clinically validated models. So things that are, sort of market meeting, and to her point again, sort of scale, right? So is this something that we're going to be able to scale? And is it just dollars, or, what is the plan moving forward? Is that, more work to be conducted inside the lab, especially in an academic spin out? Is there a plan for CMC or other things like that? And, have you at least contacted those industry partners? Do you have an idea of what it's going to take? I think those are all things we look for in diligence. Personally, we do sort of a high level diligence, after we go under confidentiality. We'd love to get, to the nitty gritty of the data, unpublished work, all those types of things. Hearing it from the founders is important. But then we also look for things like intellectual property. If there's a management team, what's the level of skill there? Where have they come from? Do we think that the team is right? And these are sort of with increasing levels of diligence, as we consider an investment moving forward.
So the only thing to add to that is we do look at the team. We look very closely at the team. There's this notion of what a coachable CEO is, and we want to make sure this is a relationship for several years. So we want to make sure that it's going to be a good relationship. We see ourselves as being founder friendly. So in that context, we want to make sure that, we can be to you not only providing capital, but also a mentor, a coach, someone to, celebrate with, someone to cry with, but also when you're ready for, some coaching on boards and taking as your company grows, because we want to be a part of the journey as you grow from where you are in the lab to the boardroom and then beyond. And then beyond that, I think the business, and everyone's touched on this, is important. How do you think about this growth? How do you think about growing as a business? And since we're not just about therapeutics, we also look at, we're also looking at digital and precision medicine and health services and stuff like that. So we want to assess the viability of your product, your development cycle, your marketing strategy, regulatory risks, if any. What are the exit opportunities? Is there any litigation risk in there? Of course, the IP, as others have said, so between that, I would say a big chunk of it is about the team itself and their ability to communicate their excitement, but also what it is that they're doing in a clear way, because, this is just the beginning of their pitching journey. They're constantly going to be pitching for the next 5 to 10 years or whatever. So we want to make sure this team can withstand that kind of scrutiny.
No, perfect.
Oh, wait, one more thing I want to say. My advice is, if you don't have one already, create a data room. There are many free ones, even Google Drive will do, but that discipline of starting to put things in a data room that gets you ready for due diligence is wonderful to just get that started. So.
And have it be well organized.
Yes, well organized.
Having to dig through just a drive that has no folders or context can be quite challenging in diligence and dampens enthusiasm, I'll say.
We have a PDF which looks really scary because it's 4 pages long of things that we look for, but I'm happy to share that. It doesn't have to be all 4 pages, but it gives you a notion of the depth to which a due diligence exercise can take, which is not often immediately obvious.
Oh, that'd be awesome. Yeah, and I'm happy to share that with folks after the conversation. One thing, so I appreciate that you all talked about both the technology side of things, like is this a compelling technology beating a compelling unmet need, but also emphasizing the team as well, as far as mentorability, coachability, and just being able to work with folks. If you're looking at a team itself, I guess what types of teams do you normally see? Is it normally a single founder? Or are you seeing folks that have multiple, I guess, academic type founders? Or I guess what kind of mix are you looking for on the team?
I think it's, for us, it's good if there's a strong science technology lead as well as a strong businessy kind of a person, because typically, that's kind of what it's going to take. But more than that, we look for the attitude. And I'll just give you one story, which I think might be relevant to this audience. So we are working with, she's a research scientist. So it's her innovation. She has the most pubs on the topic and so on and so forth. And so rather than create herself as the CEO, she said, and we were asking her, she has the title of a Chief Strategy Officer. And we said, well, why are you doing this? She says, well, I know that my value is in the science and the research. So I'm just keeping that open for a CEO. But that kind of attitude and that kind of looking ahead speaks of volumes. So yeah, so that's kind of one of the things, but I'm sure others have other insights.
Yeah, I think especially in early startups and seed, stage seed and even Series A, I don't think any of us are expecting you to have a chief medical officer or have, a head of business development and those types of things. And actually it could be a red flag if you think that you're ready for that. So I think matching the team to company stage is important. There's no need to have 50 employees that are focused on commercial, scale when you're still preclinical, right? And so I think I agree with Preetha is, having a good technologist or somebody, that can work through the technology, help us get there. Founders are great as long as I think they understand what the role is. Many academic professors want to be CEOs sometimes. And I don't know if that's, there's probably very few examples where that's been a successful transition or while they keep their day job, so to speak. So I think having, somebody to sort of take the reins and move things forward, increasingly with early stage companies, the company can remain virtual or very, very lean, for a period of time. And I think that's, just sort of smart use of funds. So again, I think matching the team size and team dynamic to the technology and stage is important.
Yeah, I think you summarized it really well, both of you. I think for 5 a.m., we do like to work with world-class founders. And so looking for folks who are leading their respective fields, and so kind of pushing the boundaries either on the technology side or perhaps on understanding disease biology, any insights there, and think about other new targets you could go after to really impact, how patients are treated. We like to engage very closely with founders, and I guess harkening back to what Preetha mentioned, attitude is a big part that I'd say, while it's not something we're like rummaging through folders for due diligence, that whole process, I'd say, is kind of it's a trial period, especially if it's the first time we're working with you. It's how we get to know you, because ultimately that whole process of due diligence through negotiation, if you get to that stage, that's at like the best of times, right? So if it's difficult to be having that relationship and manage that relationship early on, it's probably yellow to red flags going on, because that's when things are the easiest, if you will.
Yeah.
And so it's seeing if there's alignment both with, on both sides, right? Are you reaching out and do you like working with the investors you're speaking to? Do you like the vision they have, how they're thinking about building alongside with you? Do you share the same vision for the company? I think those are a lot of the discussions. It's not all just about like the data, but it's also because it's so early. Where do you see prioritization early on? Who do you think about as key, types of management, phenotypes of people that you'd want to be leading and building the company ultimately?
I also want to add, Courtney, that founders should do their due diligence. They should evaluate the venture firms. They should talk to people. They should make sure that there's, people are saying good things about them over and beyond the investment thesis fit and all that. So absolutely encourage that kind of due diligence from that side, rather, along with our due diligence, at the same checklist.
Yeah, we're happy to make intros to other CEOs where we've invested in, and we've got nothing to hide, and we hope that people are saying good things. But I agree with that, Preetha. We're would want everybody, and again, it's a sort of a marriage. We hope that's going to last for quite some time, and so the process is as much as the what's in the data room.
Oh, perfect. And I've gotten a few questions that are popping up, so I'll try to ask a few as we're going along. So one question we just received was, do investors typically charge companies for due diligence?
No.
No.
Yeah, no. That would be nice. but it is an expensive process. And I think you had a question further on about taking the lead versus not taking the lead. And it takes time and money sometimes on the part of the fund managers. You have to pay folks. You want to get their expert opinions. You want them to actually do a deep dive. So you have to be prepared for all of that.
Great. And then there's another question. How does the current financial picture of the company affect due diligence?
I think I think we're interested of how much money has come into the company, whether it's dilutive, if it's non-dilutive. I'm not sure. Maybe I don't understand the question, but I mean, the company will have a financial picture, but that should be disclosed, as part of the due diligence. And so I would not suggest trying to hide any money, but I don't think we have to understand where the company is and obviously what you're fundraising around. And so, I won't, if it's bankrupt, I guess that's a challenge, but I don't think it matters that much.
I think, are they asking if they're revenue generating now or not? Does that matter? I think in the kinds of early stage companies that we're looking at, they're typically not generating revenue. So it's okay. But is that what I don't know what they're asking. But like Justin said, we definitely care about how much money they've raised, who's got, the cap table is very important, and things like that. And projections, of course.
Perfect. Yeah, and if that person who asked if you have any additional clarity, happy to follow up. A couple of other questions that I'm going to, let's see. They said, if the company has raised no money and has spent what it has already raised, is that a problem?
No. I mean, if that's the point of money, right? To spend it and we might, I guess we could look and see if it was spent on where it was spent. Okay, here's a negative possibility. If you had raised money, but you couldn't achieve your milestones that you had claimed you would, then we might dig it a little deeper and say, what happened? Mm-hmm. You have to be a good steward of that money, because we'd expect you to be a good steward of our money when we give it to you and hit the milestones you said you would, unless something drastic like COVID or something happens, as we all know. So money management is super important. Yes, it's a lot about the science, but you're asking for capital. You're now a business. And once you make that transition in your head, you've got to manage that money wisely.
Yeah, no, that's perfect advice. That's something we even say at our stage of funding. Like, we are here for we're here to be good stewards of the funds. And so we try to help the teams manage that as best we can.
So, I was in that position. I was a researcher. I mean, I was faculty and dean at Emory when I did my startup, but didn't prepare me that much for the startup transition, which I'm going on about. So I think having the financial skills or taking the time to pick them up is important if you're going to be the CEO. And I think you should be the CEO, the founder, the inventor, whatever, at least for a time. So, but financial savvy, smarts, whatever you want to call it, is pretty important. I don't know. What do you all think? My fellow panelists.
I agree. I think maybe to the point of if you've spent what you raised, if you raised it from an institutional investor, why did you not go back to them, or why did they choose not to fund you again if you were running out of money? I think all of those questions, to Preetha's point, good stewardship of the money, and keep your investors on your good side. If you're going to be cash out, they should ideally know that, and then there's a conversation to happen about what to do. Are we not, there are delays that were sort of just unmitigated, like COVID, a clinical trial didn't enroll. Can we bridge to somewhere, something like that? So I think just understanding, why the cash situation is what it is, I think would be extremely helpful.
Yeah, I mean, ideally, if you've raised a small amount, like you're having conversations before your cash out, and especially if you have investors alongside the table with you, having that conversation earlier, right? I mean, I feel like once you start the fundraising cycle, you're going to be constantly fundraising. And so it's crucial, especially in the early stage, to make sure you have folks who are supportive, right? And are able to give you guidance and help you through the situations. I think for us, especially in the early stage, we're not expecting the founders to be managing a lot of that. We'll bring in consultants to help. We've kind of our favorite folks that we work with that can do all of the back office support, so that the founders can really just focus on the science. That's how we like it. We think it's kind of a better fit overall. We like to have our scientists engage on that front, maybe as SAB roles moving forward in the company. But yeah, I think we sort of, there's a couple groups that like specialize specifically in kind of biotech, I'd say, stage startups that are able to do R&D budgets, accounting, HR, payroll, all of that stuff. So that's kind of why we set up the 459 initiative. So folks don't have to think about it too much.
No, that's perfect. And a few other questions I have, because one thing that I'm saying, so say everything goes well in due diligence, you want to invest in us, and that's great. And discussing of what comes next. But a few questions that we had were, how many companies do you look at before you even decide to make the investment that go through this process? And then another question to follow on with that is, how has the economic downturn affected your investments being made in these early stage companies?
Maybe the first question, I don't think there's a set number of companies. We're not going to pick 20 and then, invest on the 21st. If we see a company and we like it, we'll move forward. And there could be 5 of those in the same week. That would make our lives a bit busy. But I don't think there's a set number.
Yeah, I'm with Justin on that. There is no set number. It is serendipitous sometimes, scarily so.
For sure, ebbs and flows. But I guess to give a sense of like how many we're viewing at any point, like, I don't know, it's tough on an annual basis. We probably see hundreds, if not thousands, of at least pitch decks and emails across the team, right? And of those, we'll maybe have, we'll have hundreds of calls throughout the year of intro calls. In terms of the number of those that actually go into like due diligence process and go beyond the first introductory call, maybe 50 or so. 50 or so, in a year that we'll dig into. And then, as I mentioned before, we're looking to make about 5 investments a year. So to give a sense, that's a typical, I guess, high level cadence for us.
Yeah, I would actually completely underscore what she said. That's exactly the framework that's accepted in this industry. About 1,000 companies, you looked at the top of the funnel, strategy fit, about 200, due release 75, maybe some 20, 25 LOIs, and you close on 6. That's typical numbers, but That is to say, we may not, obviously we don't see all 1,000 at the same time, and it's not one person doing it, and it's spread out, but just so you know the sense of the odds.
Yeah, we're maybe 5 to 10 new intros per week, and it may be follow-up calls with ones we're in diligence, sprinkled there, throughout, and sort of ties back to the point about cold intros. Sometimes there's just not time, in a day, a week, or a month to take everything that comes across the inbox.
Yeah, that's good to know. It sounds like you guys are very, very busy, but it's probably an enjoyable time. So one of the things so moving on to, say you guys are going to fund us. And so we're starting to look at what does it look like to work with you guys. So for example, if you
Courtney, sorry, the other question you asked about the economic downturn.
Yeah, sorry.
I don't think we have a good sense of that. I think we've been slower than we were last year, but I think that's also because we were on a tear last year. Like I think a lot of people were. And so now we're busy sort of managing those investments, and, there's just fewer things. I think it will impact some, but it's certainly, as we think about valuations and where we're deploying capital, we are mindful of that, how the public markets influence sort of what we do.
Yeah.
For sure. I mean, I'd say we're still looking for early stage opportunities. So our thesis hasn't changed, to be clear. To Justin's point, I mean, we have been doing this before, but especially now, it's actually a lot of our kind of later private companies that have been impacted probably the worst. The IPO window is completely closed for biotech, essentially. And so that does kind of shut down one of the potential exit paths. And so management teams are doubling down, redoing all their budgets for the next 2 years, making sure they can actually weather the storm, rethinking through, different creative financing structures. And so I think in at least the first quarter and really first half of this year, I think a lot of venture groups were kind of doubling down on their current portfolio companies just to make sure that they could weather those storms since they've already deployed capital there. I do see deals starting to pick up, but I think to Justin's point, valuations probably have taken a large hit just because it's a different time than a year ago, I'll say. And so just managing expectations, both from the founder perspective and from the, kind of investor perspective, definitely more sensitive to that, just to make sure that things don't balloon up too much, because we're seeing lots of flat rounds, lots of down rounds today, which are not the funnest thing to go through.
I think the thing to have to be prepared for going forward is lower valuations than we saw last year. And, last year people described it as being frothy. So I think we're definitely not, I think that's sort of worn out now, or will be wearing out very soon. Particularly important for early stage companies as their first round is setting the valuation for the next subsequent round. So it's going to be a bit harder.
So hopefully things will, well, I'd only say hopefully things will change, because we've been doing that for a couple of years, but no, that's a good perspective. And I do want to say we have about 9 minutes left for the panel. So if there are any other questions, please feel free to keep dropping them either in the chat or the Q&A, and I'll get them asked before the time is over. So a few additional questions that I had were around really, again, like if you guys have decided that this is a great investment for you, really talking about how you interact not only with the team, but with other investors. So if you're the lead investor, what does that mean? And what's the relationship between the lead investors and others and around?
I'll take that. So when, from our preference, when we're the lead, we're sort of responsible for setting, price of the round. We're sort of responsible for most of the due diligence. Often the other investors, if we have other investors around the table, we'll ask to sort of piggyback on our diligence, so not everybody's spending everything on due diligence. That being said, if the round is not sort of fully subscribed, if you will, so we haven't covered, what the company needs to raise, we can go out and socialize it within our networks and find some additional co-investors. We sort of take the lead in negotiating not only the term sheet with the company, but then the sort of full investment docs, as that comes through, and then sort of just, herding all the cats as that process moves forward.
And hopefully it's a very collegial relationship, in the syndicated deal because it's going on. I'm just looking at one of the questions. Yeah, all that he said, pretty much.
Yep. Nothing too much to add there.
And as a lead, I think we typically take a board seat. We tend to be fairly active investors. And so we do try to match, at least some scientific expertise, on who's holding that board seat. Setting the size of the board, I think, is important. I don't think a seed stage company needs 7 members on its board. Mm-hmm. So we do try to match that, but I think as a lead, it's expected that you'll have a board seat, you keep your investor close, and then use them. Having them on the board is a real asset, I think.
Oh, awesome. Yeah, that's very helpful because one of the questions that we get a lot, like what should they expect from their investors? And one question that came through the chat was, what kind of partnerships?
Can I just add, I think if you put it that way, what do you expect? I think you should, as a founder, expect a good relationship of trust, but there has to be, a balance of everything. So you as the founder should be updating your investors at regular intervals, so that they can expect this of you and they know what's going on. No one is served, no one's interests are served by long silences or, and so having a board seat is good, but there are other people at the table as well, the other syndicated members. And I think you can expect, and you ought to expect, that your venture, your investor will pick up the phone for you, make those calls, pull out their Rolodex, as it were. Nowadays, that doesn't even exist anymore. Your LinkedIn networks, because that's the name of the game. And you have to recognize that it is a win-win. It has to be a win-win for everybody. But you have to play your part as well. And I think gone are the days, well, maybe I shouldn't say that. You don't want to be in a confrontational relationship. And I think everybody here in this room, we want a positive relationship. We want a long-term relationship, but you've got to do your part in that as well. So that's my 2 cents on the matter.
Yeah, I appreciate that because I've heard that it's kind of a theme between each of your responses, that this is a relationship. You guys are going to be tied together for a while. So having one that is mutually beneficial and open, I think, is something that folks should strive for. Because it not only helps in whatever round that they are currently working through, but even as they continue down their path. So if there are no other comments on that one, one of the questions that we had come through the chat was, what kind of partnerships do you look for or want early stage biotech or medical device companies to have?
I guess for us, I don't know that it's a requirement, or maybe I'm not understanding the question. Depending on the technology, we may think about, especially for, I don't know, let's say it's a large platform, or even in this environment, the more non-dilutive funding you can get, probably the better. So if that's kind of like grants, foundations that are able to fund, certain aspects of the programs, pharma partnerships, that's something that we consider as we're making an investment. And so I'll give one example, like within Soma, which is one of the companies we launched back February of last year. Alongside a Series A, they also came out with a large collaboration with Takeda. And so, that's something that we thought about early in the seed stage of how do we finance, large platform. It's an in vivo HSC gene cell therapy company with a novel vector. And so just from that perspective, it's a lot more capital intensive than perhaps, a small molecule platform company that you're standing up. And so thinking about strategic partnerships, other folks who are interested in the space, who believe in the platform and are interested. And so if there's, certain indications you can carve out that aren't I'd say the most valuable pieces of the platform that you can kind of give to other pharma partners to develop and have that also fund the development of your platform. I think those are ideal partnerships. And I wouldn't say we expect that going into it ahead of our investment, but that's something we can kind of brainstorm together.
I think a willingness to have partnerships, understand, how companies may shift or pivot will be important. But I agree with Michelle. I don't think any are expected, but certainly no bad partnerships.
Yeah, I think of partnerships as a way to validate the original, whatever idea that you have. So whatever is aligned, if it's partnerships with companies that help you validate what you've done. So if you have something, a diabetic drug or something, then, maybe whoever is the right company. We also look for, if it's a therapeutic, we look for validation from the leaders, the pharma leaders in the field, if there's something like that, a proof of concept study, something like that. Yeah. You're muted, Courtney.
Of course. No, you say that is very helpful to know, as again, people are thinking long-term of how to start approaching you guys and what's important. What are you guys looking for? And with the last couple of minutes that we have left, I've very much enjoyed this conversation. I have a million questions I could ask you guys, but if you could say maybe a sentence or two, what would be your parting advice that you would have for university-based innovators who are really looking to navigate this path through commercialization? And I guess I could start with Justin.
I think, again, leverage your network, but I think also having, as a university founder, you may want to have at least someone on the team that can dedicate some time. I think most university professors have a day job. Navigating, a fundraising round is labor intensive. It takes time. There'll be lots of no's. There'll be, some follow-ups and things like that. So making sure you have the time to commit. And so therefore you probably want to have at least, somebody engage on the business side of the technology to really give it, the best chance possible for success.
I would say you're probably doing this already, but think very, very deeply about what problem you're trying to solve. The deeper you go on that, and in terms of not just the technology piece, but how that's going to actually result in a better medicine for patients, think very deeply about that. Because if you haven't thought too much about it, it's hard to have a deeper conversation. So I think the folks who spend the most time thinking through it, of both emerging therapeutics, where it fits in with standard of care, and why it will be a meaningful impact, you're just going to have much richer discussions with investors.
I think if you absolutely listen to Justin and Michelle, and then the last point, the number 3 point would be to remember that you are now communicating with an audience that may not have the same depth of knowledge that you do. So communicating what the problem is and what your solution is and what the market is very, very important. So that clarity of communication, we can get lost in that. And remember that there's a world out there outside just the science that's important for a business to succeed. So know the market, do your reading, do your learning around that as well, so that you're knowledgeable about more than just the science. That's what I think.
Oh, that was great. That was a fantastic summary. I'm going to share this with all of our teams that we're meeting with. Well, we are actually at time. I really appreciated the conversation with you all. And for the folks that are in the audience, again, we will share this recording as well as a survey for the end of the year. But thank you all again for attending today, and for the panelists for having such a great conversation with us. And I hope you have a great rest of your day.